Randolph Scott really hated him more than anyone. Randolph Scott was born as George Randolph Scott on January 23, 1898, in Orange County, Virginia. He grew up in a big Southern family that believed in discipline, learning, and honesty, things that would later shape who he was on screen and in real life. His dad, George Grant Scott, was a respected textile worker, and his mom, Lucille Crane Scott, was known for being kind and classy. Randolph was the second of 7 kids, and growing up in Charlotte, North Carolina, taught him to be calm, confident, and good-hearted, just like the men he would play in movies later. He went to private schools first, then studied at Georgia Tech and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. At first, he wanted to be like his dad and work in business or engineering. But life in Hollywood had something else in mind. Scott's rise to fame didn't happen fast. He served bravely in World War I as an artillery officer in France. When he came home, he wanted a new purpose. In the early 1920s, during a trip to California, he became fascinated by the new movie industry growing there. With his tall body, handsome looks, and polite Southern manners, he caught the eye of casting directors. He started small, doing stunts and extra work before getting speaking parts. He worked hard, stayed humble, and kept trying, which made him different from many others. By the late 1920s, he was getting regular work in Hollywood and later moved into sound films, where his deep voice made him stand out. Perfect through the 1930s and 1940 seconds, Randolph Scott's career grew fast. He acted in many kinds of movies, from funny ones to serious ones, but it was Western films that made him truly famous. With movies like The Last of the Mohicans 1936, Western Union 1941, and The Desperado 1943, Scott became known as the perfect Western hero, calm, brave, and always doing what's right. His characters followed a strong moral code, showing honesty and courage, just like he did in real life. Unlike many other stars, Scott stayed away from the wild Hollywood lifestyle. He was known for being professional, quiet, and serious about his work. His teamwork with director Bud Boetticher in the 1950s created some of the best westerns ever made, including 7 Men from Now 1956, Ride Lonesome 1959, and Comanche Station 1960. These movies, now seen as classics, showed Scott as a tough man haunted by his past but guided by strong morals. Scott's influence reached far beyond his last movie, Ride the High Country 1962, directed by Sam Peckinpah. In that film, he played an old lawman trying to keep his values in a changing world, a role that matched his real-life retirement. When he quit acting, he did it proudly, choosing to leave Hollywood on his own terms. He invested smartly in land and business, becoming one of the richest actors of his time. But even with all his money, he stayed humble and focused on his family and faith. Here's Randolph Scott was married twice in his life, and both marriages showed different sides of him, one filled with high society and the other with simple family peace. His first marriage happened in 1936 when he married heiress Marion DuPont, a woman from one of the richest and most powerful families in America. Marion was the daughter of William DuPont Oster, part of the famous DuPont family, and the great-granddaughter of Louis Irene DuPont de Nemours, the French chemist who started the huge DuPont company. By marrying her, Scott entered a world of old money and privilege. Far from his modest childhood in North Carolina, Marion herself was not just a rich woman, she was smart, strong, and loved horses. She owned Montpelier, the historic Virginia home that once belonged to President James Madison, and turned it into one of the best horse farms in the country. Before marrying Scott, Marion had been married to George Somerville, a sportsman from Virginia, and funny enough, Randolph Scott had been the best man at their wedding. This made their later romance a little surprising, showing how their bond slowly grew from friendship to love. But even with all the luxury around them, their marriage didn't last. Their lives were just too different. Scott was busy in Hollywood working on his movies, while Marion stayed focused on her horse breeding and East Coast social life. The couple spent a lot of time apart, both in distance and lifestyle. In 1939, only 3 years after they married, they got divorced. They didn't have any children, but their breakup stayed friendly. Interestingly, Marion kept using the name Marion DuPont Scott for the rest of her life, until her death in 1983, maybe out of respect or because that name had become part of who she was in the horse world. Here's after being single for a few years, Randolph Scott finally found true happiness in his second marriage. In 1944, he married Patricia Stillman, a beautiful actress who was 21 years younger than him. Patricia had acted in a few movies in the early 1940s, but after marrying Scott, she chose to focus on family life. Their marriage was very different from his first one with Marion DuPont. This time, it was built on real love and shared values, not money or social status. The couple lived a calm and private life, staying away from Hollywood's spotlight and drama. In 1950, they adopted 2 children, a daughter named Sandra and a son named Christopher. Scott, who always played strong, quiet heroes on screen, turned out to be a kind and loving father at home. Friends often talked about how warm and happy his family life was. He and Patricia had a strong bond that lasted through the years. Unlike many other movie stars, Scott managed to keep his marriage free from scandals and public problems. His family became the most important thing in his later life. Randolph and Patricia stayed married for 40 years, until his death in 1987. Their marriage became one of Hollywood's quiet success stories. When he wasn't working, Scott loved spending time at their ranch near Santa Barbara or their home in Beverly Hills. He enjoyed the peace, the horses, and the open land. Through his life with Patricia, Scott found the calm and balance he had always wanted, a simple, peaceful world that matched the strong, dependable men he played in his movies. Herein the world of Hollywood westerns. Few stars were as big as Randolph Scott and John Wayne. Both were tall, tough, and famous for playing brave cowboys. But behind the scenes, they didn't get along at all. Many fans thought they were friends, but the truth was very different. Randolph Scott, the polite Southern gentleman with good manners and quiet pride, deeply disliked John Wayne. Their problem wasn't just about fame, it was about personality, values, and how each man saw acting and the idea of a cowboy. "I never liked the man," Scott once said. "He stood for everything in Hollywood that I didn't respect." Scott believed in being calm and careful both in real life and in movies. His acting was quiet and strong, without needing to show off. John Wayne, however, was loud, confident, and always wanted attention. "Wayne was a showman," Scott said. "I was a craftsman." Scott thought Wayne's kind of acting was more about looking brave than truly being real. He saw Wayne as a product of Hollywood's image-making, not as a true storyteller. To him, Wayne's cowboy was more about selling an image than living by real principles. Even though they never acted in the same movie, the competition between them was always there. Both were top Western stars in the 1940s and 1950 seconds, and movie studios often compared their success. "The studios tried to make us rivals," Scott said. "But we were 2 different kinds of men." Scott's movies had deeper meaning and moral struggles, while Wayne's focused on action and patriotism. Scott thought Wayne's stories were too simple. "I played men who asked questions," he said. Wayne played men who never did. Their personalities clashed too. Scott was quiet and humble, never bragging or talking politics. Wayne was loud, opinionated, and often pushed his political views. "He liked to talk about war and politics," Scott said. "2 things I never thought belonged in a bar or on a movie set." Scott disliked Wayne's black and white way of seeing the world. He believed life, like the Old West, was full of gray areas. Whenever they met, the mood turned cold. At parties, Scott would quietly leave if Wayne showed up. Their friends, like Gary Cooper and Joel McCrea, tried not to take sides, but what truly made Scott lose respect for Wayne was his belief that Wayne was a hypocrite. Wayne had avoided serving in World War II, even though he played soldiers and heroes on screen. Scott respected real soldiers and couldn't forgive that choice. "I didn't judge men who stayed home," he said, "but I couldn't stand those who acted like war heroes after refusing to be one." To Scott, Wayne cared more about fame than honor. Still, Scott never attacked him publicly. He kept his opinions private until later in life. "I respected his success," Scott said, "but I never respected the man." Their quiet feud became part of Hollywood legend. They both shaped Westerns, Scott through his calm and moral strength, and Wayne through his larger-than-life courage. Ironically, their differences helped make the Western genre complete. But Scott never changed his feelings. "John Wayne," he once said coldly, "was the last man I'd ever ride beside." Randolph Scott died in 1987 in Beverly Hills at age 89 from heart and lung problems. He was buried in Elmwood Cemetery in Charlotte, North Carolina. His wife Patricia, whom he'd been married to for 43 years, died in 2004 and was buried next to him. Their old Beverly Hills home was torn down in 2008. His letters, photos, and papers were given to the UCLA Library for safekeeping.